Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unravel a truly fascinating legal and investigative puzzle. Have you ever wondered how the justice system actually works when the ultimate piece of evidence, the victim themselves, has completely vanished? Well, today we are diving deep into the absolutely chilling case of Rosalio Gutierrez. He was a devoted father who literally seemed to drop off the face of the earth back in May of 2020. This whole case is a masterclass in forensic persistence and piecing together circumstantial evidence. We're going to reconstruct exactly how investigators managed to corner a killer and bring him to justice completely without a body. So right out of the gate, the crucial question we have to tackle is this: can you actually prove a murder without a body? You know, in the legal world, a no-body homicide is notoriously difficult for prosecutors to win. Think about it. Without human remains, you almost never have an autopsy. And without an autopsy, it's incredibly hard to definitively prove how someone died, or honestly, even rule out the possibility that they didn't just walk away to start a brand new life somewhere. Defense attorneys absolutely love these cases because they naturally breed a ton of reasonable doubt. Keep this massive hurdle in the back of your mind as we walk through how this investigation unfolded.
Okay, let's set the scene. Our mystery kicks off on May 19th, 2020, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Sadie Beecham heads over to her boyfriend Rosalio's apartment to do a quick wellness check. She hasn't heard from him in about 24 hours, which is highly unusual. The visceral panic you can hear in her 911 call captures the exact, terrifying moment this whole case begins. She doesn't find Rosalio, but what she does find is enough to send a chill straight down your spine.
Section 1. A gruesome discovery.
When detectives arrived at that initial crime scene, it was immediately obvious to them that they weren't looking for a guy who just decided to take a spontaneous vacation. The evidence inside completely ruled out any sort of voluntary disappearance. For starters, both of Rosalio's vehicles were still parked right outside. The patio screen door left wide open. And inside, investigators walked into a truly horrifying scene. There was blood, and we're talking a significant amount of blood, later confirmed to be Rosalio's, splattered on the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and the couch. Furniture had been violently shoved around. But honestly, perhaps the most telling detail of the whole scene were these incredibly distinct clean lines on the bloody floor. They perfectly outlined where an area rug used to be. Detectives knew right away what that meant. Killers frequently use carpets to wrap up and transport a body. So someone had brutally attacked Rosalio and then actually attempted to clean up the mess.
Section 2. The stalking escalates.
While detectives were still processing that gruesome apartment, a frantic Sadie pointed them directly toward her ex-boyfriend, Zachariah Anderson. Now, Sadie and Zachariah had 3 children together, and this incredibly turbulent on-again, off-again relationship that Sadie had finally ended for good in 2019. But Zachariah, he flat out refused to let go. When Sadie started dating Rosalio, who by all accounts was this devoted family man who loved coaching his kids' sports teams, Zachariah became dangerously obsessed. He started stalking them. He even showed up at Sadie's house, which blew up into a violent episode where he started throwing her things out of her own home. The police actually had to be called out for that one, but his obsession was about to take an even darker, way more manipulative turn.
And guys, this brings us to what is easily one of the most chilling details of the entire case. Zachariah actually used his own 12-year-old daughter, Olivia, as a pawn to spy on her mother and Rosalio. He would take her over to Sadie's house in the dead of night. In her testimony later on, Olivia revealed that her father specifically instructed her to pull her shirt up over her mouth and nose while she peeked through her mother's windows. Why? So she wouldn't leave breath marks on the glass. He even went as far as shoving a phone into an air conditioning vent just to listen in on their conversations. Based on this deeply disturbing stalking behavior alone, police had enough probable cause to arrest Zachariah on May 19th. That is the exact same day Rosalio was reported missing.
Section 3. Following the forensics.
So, the police have Zachariah in custody for stalking, but he is denying everything. He literally has an excuse for every single piece of evidence. He claims he wasn't stalking Sadie at all. He was just, gathering evidence for a custody battle. However, detectives executed a search warrant at his property in Macon, Wisconsin, and that alibi crumbled incredibly fast. They uncovered these highly methodical cover-up steps. The second they opened his minivan, they were hit with the overwhelming smell of bleach. They also noticed that about a third of the carpet in the very back of the van had been completely ripped out. But right there on the dashboard, he left a critical mistake, a Walmart receipt. It showed that on the morning of May 18th, which is just one single day before Rosalio was reported missing, Zachariah went out and bought garbage bags, latex gloves, and 2 entire bottles of bleach.
But you're probably wondering, what about the missing carpet? What about the bloody clothes? Well,
Detectives wandered into the backyard and found this massive fire pit that was actually still smoldering when they got there. Now keep that number 6 in mind for a second. This specific area of Wisconsin had just been slammed with 6 inches of heavy rain over the previous 4 days. For that fire pit to still be smoking through that level of an absolute downpour, the fire had to have been intensely hot and deliberately kept alive. And sure enough, inside the ashes, they found burned pieces of clothing and the melted remains of a bleach container.
Despite finding all of that, investigators still didn't have a body. They searched Zachariah's massive family tree farm using drones, ground-penetrating radar, and cadaver dogs. They even searched a deep quarry pond nearby. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But over at the crime lab, they were still painstakingly processing Zachariah's minivan, and after 8 agonizing days, they finally got a hit. They found a single, microscopic speck of blood hidden deep in the rear passenger side quarter panel, and it was a positive DNA match for Rosalio Gutierrez. This was the massive turning point of the investigation, because, as investigators noted at the time, even though Rosalio's body was physically gone, he was still managing to tell them exactly what happened through that one single drop of blood.
Section 4. Murder without a body.
Armed with this absolute mountain of circumstantial evidence, prosecutors officially charged Zachariah Anderson with first-degree murder. Now, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it actually took almost 3 years to finally get this case to trial. The prosecution had a really tough job. They had to build an airtight narrative strictly out of puzzle pieces. They leaned heavily on Zachariah's obsessive stalking history, those highly suspicious Walmart purchases, the undeniable violence that took place at the apartment, and of course, that microscopic drop of blood in the van. On the flip side, the defense hammered away relentlessly at everything that was missing. No body, no human remains, no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses. They argued to the jury that the prosecution's entire case was just an assembly of guesswork and remote possibilities.
So, to counter the glaring lack of a body, the prosecution brought forward a man named Marion Washington. He was a jailhouse informant who had actually shared a cell with Zachariah. Washington testified that Zachariah flat out confessed to him, bragged about stabbing Rosalio, wrapping his body up in garbage bags, and throwing him away in the trash. When Washington asked him what exactly that meant, Zachariah allegedly replied, "Once it's gone, it's gone." Washington also mentioned that other inmates had given Zachariah a pretty chilling nickname behind bars. They called him Houdini. Why? Because he made a body disappear.
Section 5. The trial and verdict.
The trial itself dragged on for 4 incredibly tense weeks, but the true emotional climax of the whole thing didn't actually come from the forensic experts or the jailhouse informants. It came from a deeply emotional, painful family confrontation. Olivia, Zachariah's daughter, who was 14 years old by the time the trial finally happened, had to take the stand and testify against her own father. It was absolutely heartbreaking. She broke down in tears, admitting she just didn't realize how hard it was going to be to sit there and testify. But what happened next was truly shocking. While Olivia was up on the stand crying, the defendant, Zachariah Anderson, was actively observed gesturing with his hands, signaling his daughter to zip it and keep quiet. Right there, in the courtroom. It was a brazen, real-time display of the exact same manipulation he had been using on her for years.
Ultimately, it fell to the jury to piece together all that circumstantial evidence, along with the incredibly telling behavior they had just witnessed with their own eyes in the courtroom. In the end, they didn't buy the defense's story. They found Zachariah Anderson guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and hiding a corpse. He maintained his absolute innocence during the sentencing phase, but the judge wasn't having it, and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
But look, a guilty verdict is not the same thing as a neatly wrapped conclusion. I really want to ground this explainer in the tragic reality of what this crime actually cost these families. At our father's sentencing, Olivia Anderson asked the court a truly devastating question. She asked, "Did he ever love me, or was I just a pawn, a toy, or his little golden retriever?" It perfectly highlights the massive, rippling collateral damage of Zachariah's obsession. It wasn't just Rosalio whose life was destroyed here. It was Zachariah's very own family, who are now forever scarred by his horrific manipulation.
Ultimately, the lasting legacy of a no-body homicide is the realization that justice in a courtroom doesn't just magically fix the trauma left behind in its wake. Rosalio Gutierrez's mother stood before the court and tearfully explained that her son's killer left her with no son to grieve over and absolutely no grave to visit. Even with a convicted killer locked behind bars for the rest of his natural life, a family is still forced to wonder forever. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. How does a family truly heal when the final, most important piece of the puzzle is deliberately kept from them forever? Thank you so much for exploring this complex and heartbreaking